Okay, hey everybody. So this Bible study, basically, it's kind of a life update for me, and all that jazz. We're gonna be reading in Job. I'm gonna read chapter 1 and 2, so bear with me, please. And we're just gonna jump right on it. So, Job 1, verse 1. There was a man in the country of Uz named Job. He was a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. His estate included 7,000 sheep and goats, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large number of servants. Job was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to take turns having banquets at their homes. They would send an invitation to their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Whenever a round of banqueting was over, Job would send for his children and purify them, rising early in the morning to offer burnt offerings for all of them. For Job thought, perhaps my children have sinned, having cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular practice. Verse 6. One day the sons of Job came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" "From roaming around the earth," Satan answered him, "and walking around on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity, who fears God and turns away from evil." Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face." Verse 12. Very well, the Lord told Satan, "Everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job himself." So Satan left the Lord's presence. One day when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and reported, while the oxen were plowing and the donkeys grazing nearby, the Sabeans swooped down and took them away. They struck down the servants with a sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. He was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, God's fire fell from heaven. It burned the sheep and the servants and devoured them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. That messenger was still speaking when yet another came and reported, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, made a raid on the camels, and took them away. They struck down the servants with a sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. He was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on the young people so that they died. I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job stood up, tore his robe, and shaved his head. He fell to the ground and worshipped, saying, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Throughout all this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. Chapter 2, verse 1. One day the sons of God came again to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" "From roaming through the earth," Satan answered him, "and walking around on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity who fears God and turns away from evil. He still retains his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason." "Skin for skin," Satan answered the Lord. "A man will give up everything he owns in exchange for his life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." "Very well," the Lord said, Satan. "He is in your power. Only spare his life." So Satan left the Lord's presence and infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself while he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." "You speak as a foolish woman speaks," he told her. "Should we accept only good from God and not adversity?" Throughout all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Verse 11, now when Job's 3 friends, I am so not saying these names, heard about all the adversity that had happened to him, each of them came from his home. They met together to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they looked from a distance, they could barely recognize him. They wept aloud, and each man tore his robe and threw dust in the air and on his head. Then they sat on the ground with him 7 days and nights, but no one spoke a word to him because they saw that his suffering was very intense. And I do encourage you guys to go read King James Version. That was CSB, but King James normally has more insightfulness with the words that it uses. But I went ahead and read that version. And so this Bible study, we're just going to talk about suffering. If you have been watching my previous Bible studies, then you know this year has been a troubling one. I am in no way saying my events come close to what Job experienced. I am not even saying that what I experienced has the same reasoning behind it. I do want to take a minute to recap the events to show you towards the end of this Bible study just how good and sovereign our God really is, though. At the beginning of this year, I was in a wreck. A few days later, I was in another wreck. That same day of the second wreck, I received a phone call that brought me to my knees in tears. I apologize for any tears I do shed through this. I'm really going to try not to. My grandmother had been told that she has a tumor or a mass on her liver that was not there before. Later, it was discovered that this was cancerous, diagnosed as adenocarcinoma. Each week was filled with just worse news. The oncologist that originally was working with her told my mom that my grand doesn't have that much time left, told her that even with treatment of this mass, she only has maybe 2 years left. Basically, all we would be doing is trying to prolong the pain and suffering she would inevitably experience and prolong her life only by a little bit. In the midst of this, I did have a boyfriend of nearly a year, asked my parents for their blessing, bought the engagement ring, made plans to propose, told everyone in my life, then to turn around and make excuses as to why he is having second thoughts. I was hurt, devastated, but a good friend called attention to some things that I had missed. So the break turned into a breakup. This breakup interrupted, unfortunately, my work and my job, and I came to struggle to trust the people around me due to him being a previous employee of that same unit. It caused me to try and consider leaving the unit and applying to other positions. I had applied for other jobs and nothing was working out. The excuses were very poor when I would ask for feedback. The house searching was going terribly. An offer was placed on a home and I was incredibly excited and I was outbidded pretty much. So I had someone really close to me, actually the summer leave, then proceed to not want to see or speak to me again after waiting until asking me to book a flight to go see them. My grandfather was diagnosed with late congestive heart failure and was refusing treatment, still is, but we now are unsure if it's heart failure. My car ended up with more issues and I spent way too much money on making sure she was good. My dog got attacked and ended up at the emergency vet. My other dog got spayed, but they didn't do a good job and she ended up back at the vet. And this is just me stating what has happened this past year. Now I want us to take a closer look at Job's life. What does suffering look like? For everyone, it's different. One of the greatest difficulties in life is coping with suffering when it touches you and the people you love. No one lives just suffer free. God never promised that. Suffering can touch our lives at 4 different levels, which often overlap. Our physical health can be taken from us temporarily or permanently. Our most important relationships in life may be lost, damaged, or destroyed. Our emotional health can be attacked by stress, depression, or a host of other problems. Our spiritual lives may be shaken as we fight spiritual battles. Job was a righteous man who served God with his whole heart. He endured suffering at every point in his life. His possessions were destroyed, his children were killed, and his health was ruined. Job didn't understand his suffering and anguish. His wife didn't understand, and she offered horrible advice. His friends didn't understand. They did a good example at the end of chapter 2, but the responses got worse through the rest of Job. but they didn't understand his suffering, and they eventually turned on him. Job ended up devastated at every point of his being. Like Job, his wife, and friends, we struggle with the question, why am I or the people I love suffering? We want to know why, and each character offers their reasoning. So why suffer? What's the reasoning behind it? With Satan, suffering causes people to forsake God. Satan is causing some of us to suffer today. Satan is the root of all of our suffering, either directly or indirectly. He always has evil intentions in mind for us. Satan wanted Job to turn his back on God, and he works the same with us today. The process of drifting away from God happens gradually. We quit reading our Bible on a regular basis, then we quit praying on a daily basis. Little by little, we fall away from weekly church attendance. We drift away from our Christian friends. Our thought life and language begin to change. However, Satan had to ask God if he could attack Job. And God set a limit on what Satan could do to Job. God is still in control of our lives, whether we can sense it or not. God is aware of every time Satan tries to bring suffering into our lives. Satan can't touch us unless God allows it. Suffering tests our faith in God. Suffering reveals the quality of our faith. Suffering can deepen our faith. And with Job, or Job's wife, suffering is a reason to give up on life. It isn't. Do not ever give up. And that's a whole nother Bible study. And I have even mentioned before that I have come very, very close. But do not give up. Then we have Job's friends. Suffering is punishment for sin. I don't know about y'all, but I have had friends that say, if you ever need me, just call. But when trouble hits, we can't really count on them. That was Job's friends. They don't share his pain. They don't help him through his suffering. And what Job needed was a friend to share his suffering with. It's what we all need. God stressed that Job was afflicted with suffering without reason. Suffering is not always the direct result of sin. Suffering is not always our fault. Sometimes bad things do happen to good people. Then we have Job. Suffering sometimes has no explanation. Job was so overwhelmed with his pain that he couldn't feel God's presence. Job felt abandoned by God. Job endured the test of faith because he trusted in God even when life made no sense. Job learned to trust in God even when he didn't understand. Sometimes we just have to say, God, I'm putting my life in your hands. I've done everything I know to do. You take control. Let him take control. Surrender it. Surrender it all to God. We know that God is all loving, he is all knowing, and he is all powerful. Let it go, hand it over, surrender whatever it is to him. And then we have God. Suffering teaches us to trust in God for who he is, not for what he does. After 37 chapters of silence in Job, God finally answered him. God gives us his presence, his word, and his people to help us in trials, and that is enough. Suffering will either drive us into God's arms or suffering will cause us to walk away from God. Don't make the wrong choice. Jesus knows suffering and he knows pain. Who better else to relate to? So, what God allows for his glory. When I read Job's story of tremendous grief, I can feel the same grief and emptiness in certain areas of my life, past and present. And then in the night, suffering comes to us stealing what we once claimed as our own. Joy, control, love, possessions, people. Suffering stole all of those things from Job, following a rarely recorded conversation between God and Satan. When Satan threatened to strike down everything Job owned, God's response was a little confusing. Very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job himself. Job never knows why, but his words at the end of chapter 1 gives us something to consider. Gripped by grief, Job falls to the ground in worship, proclaiming, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. God's glory has the final word. When we compare Job to Christ, the ultimate sufferer, we find a similar outcome. God allows Christ to be crucified. But just as Jesus identifies with and understands our suffering, he also provides an end to it, proclaiming it is finished. Suffering is a gap, a void, that will be filled fully and finally in glory. One of the things I'm learning right now in my life is that I can't miss what God has for me. I can't miss a job opportunity that God has for me. I can't miss the house that God has for me. I can't miss the purpose that God has for me because he prepared it for me. He has already been where I am. He has already made a way. I just have to show up and do my part and my very best. My job is to pray and have faith. My job is to show up when I am scared of an outcome and still go ahead and go through with it. My job is to trust that his plan is better than my own. I listed everything that this year has brought, but I want to share some of the more recent life updates. I had a friend from work, after we had dinner together, text me saying what she felt like God had placed on her heart for me to hear. She started to describe fireflies and their light in the midst of the darkness. She ends it with saying, just keep looking for the light will come. During these really rough times, I had friends I didn't think would show up actually stay and check in. During this really rough season, I got closer to my grandmother and she helped me fall in love with cooking. During this season, I have grown tremendously in my faith, and I did not handle everything perfectly or righteously. I threw my tantrums, but God still gave me grace and mercy. Right now, my grand received news that the mass is still there, but it's shrinking. The doctor is hopeful, and we're looking okay. We're looking good. Right now, I have 5 more shifts left, and I start my dream job as a pediatric RN. I am sad about leaving my floor. I'm sad about leaving my friends. But that has been a dream for over 8 years. And it's finally going to happen. Right now, I am in a binding contract with a beautiful home that I intend to use for God's purpose if he deems it fit. We still got a few weeks left before I sign any papers, but I'm in the middle of it. Right now, I am cooking for my family here and there and getting to share some of that with people I work with currently. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but I love being able to provide for people. And you're also talking to the girl who never once cooked for herself until this past summer. Okay, maybe toast, some eggs, that was it. But I'm actually cooking. Right now, I had the privilege of interviewing with the school I graduated nursing school from, and I got offered a clinical instructor position. When I graduated school, I did not have my dream job. I wasn't even at my dream hospital. I was far from owning a home, and I knew I really wanted to one day come back and either teach or help out in some way, shape, or form, but it wasn't something I could do or felt like I'd be equipped to do. There are still things that I want and desire, like a husband and kids, the big backyard, all of that. But I do not need it now. It has all been surrendered to Jesus. I just need to shout my praises for what he's doing and even will do, even though I have no idea what it is. But I know it's going to be amazing. And I never thought I would be where I'm at. My professors got to see me on the other side of some difficult situations. And they stood in front of me, stating the growth they saw and how proud they were of me. Those statements from those women who taught me will mean more to me than they will ever understand. And there is a song called In the Room by Maverick City. One of the lyrics goes like this: "Go ask Daniel if our God will bring you out, and he will testify he shuts the lion's mouth. Go ask those Hebrew boys if he'll stick by your side. They will identify the fourth man in the fire." That verse, that lyric has been an encouragement, and I hope it encourages you. God has a whole plan for you. Keep looking for the light. Keep fighting for what you want. Keep praying for what you want. And surrender it all to God. And that's all I have for today. Thank you.